Regenerative agriculture is growing, and that's a good thing, but we're going to have to figure out how to market these products to people who are actually looking for them.
Health and nutrition was a high priority for consumers. And then when you narrow down even further to look at the emerging regenerative market, this becomes one of the highest priority values that they're looking to meet in their own purchase decisions. And it comes down to increasing nutrient density, the actual vitamins and minerals in the food that they're purchasing. They want to see an increase in that.
This group of people is actually willing to pay more for these products.
89% of them report that they would happily pay more for regenerative products because it's one set of a factor. Price is one set of a factor in multiple data points. It loses the punch of the most important because there's so many other values they want to fulfill.
We're going to discuss the regenerative market with Kristine Root today from Regenified on episode 449 of the Working Cows podcast. Brought to you by PowerFlex Supply.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag studios. Very excited to be joined once again today by Kristine Root. Kristine is one of the people over there at Regenified doing the work of verifying regenerative food systems, basically, supply chains, the whole works, and they're trying to give a accreditation factor to the regenerative products that people are finding on the store shelves. And they've done a bunch of research trying to figure out what exactly is it that this market wants, who are they, what brings them to regenerative agriculture looking for these products. And we're going to talk about all that today on the Working Cows podcast. But first, a word from our sponsor today, Rangeward. Rangeward builds all-in-one solar-powered electric fencing machines for the serious grazer. Their units feature powered reels, built-in solar chargers, and step-in post storage, saving you labor costs, increasing your profitability, and enabling you to spend your time on other projects. Rangeward's time-saving machines can be found on hundreds of thousands of acres across Canadian and U.S. pastures, ranging from small hobby or homestead farms to massively privately owned and corporately run pastures and grazing co-ops. Every unit is designed from the ground up to include feedback from working producers and is built in Rangeward's advanced manufacturing facilities in the U.S. and Canada. Rangeward offers a full lineup of fencing solutions, from the power grazer capable of handling 30 miles of fencing to the all-new power reel, delivering a Rangeward quality and efficiency. Rangeward offers a full lineup of fencing solutions, from the power grazer, capable of handling 30 miles of fencing, to the all-new power reel, delivering Rangeward quality and efficiency in a lower-cost package that will mount to an ATV or side-by-side. To learn more, visit rangeward.com. I'm guessing it's on my issue because that took longer than it should have, but so we'll go from there. Kristine, thanks for joining me again on the Working Cows podcast. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, very exciting new kind of publication of some research that came out of some of the work that you're doing there with Regenified. So just as a refresher, talk to me a little bit about the work of Regenified, what you guys are doing, and then we'll dive into some of the fruit of this research.
Yeah, Regenified, we're a verification and certification company. So what we do is we go out boots on the ground capturing data from regenerative farms to measure both the practices that farms have in place and the ecosystem outcomes that they're achieving as a result of their management practices. And that data then validates that regenerative farms have a positive impact on our ecosystems, improving the quality of products coming off of farms and improving the environment in which they're growing. And that market data helps people throughout the supply chain understand the positive impact and make investments in supporting farmers who are doing more.
Yeah, very good. And we'll have a link in the show notes page for today, kind of the deep dive on the work of Regenified and some of those things. But I wanted to, as I said, pivot towards this research that you guys have done. So talk to me a little bit about the research itself. What was kind of the method, and how was it conducted, and what kind of participation did you have?
Yeah, well, it really was born out of questions that I was receiving in the market. I would find myself in an interview with a writer or at a conference, and people were asking, kind of where's the consumer at in this? What's the market opportunity here? And that just opened up a curiosity in me to say, well, I don't want to guess at this. Why don't we find out? And so we fielded a study going out to 850 consumers across the US. And the study was done in two parts. The goal for the study was to understand the broad, general consumer in the marketplace and figure out, looking through the lens of food purchases and values at shelf when consumers were shopping. We really explored that 250 consumers and said, okay, what do they care about? In that, we found from that 250 consumers that 12% of those consumers predominantly are shopping with two things leading their values: best taste and lowest price, best value. And those were such high priorities for 12% of that population that we said, okay, let's open the study back up and move those consumers who are only interested in taste and price to the side. And let's focus on the 88% of the population who is going to the shelf looking to fill a larger set of values through their purchase behavior. So in total, 850 consumers that were a lookalike of the U.S. population in terms of age, gender, urban, rural dwellers, income. They matched the U.S. population as a whole. And we said, let's focus on just the 88% of that group that is looking at shopping with values in mind, so we can better understand the values that shoppers go to shelf with and figure out if there's an opportunity. Is there an alignment, or is there a segment of consumers that is aware of and interested in supporting regenerative agriculture? And that was really just the outset of it, is what can we learn? Fielded through 850 consumers across the U.S. market.
Very interesting. So one of the things that I hear a lot when we're talking about the demand and the demand for certain kinds of labels and products and those things is that price is always the number one thing, and that most shoppers, that's what it ultimately comes down to, is what's the sticker price, and that makes the majority of their buying decision. But if I understand what you're saying right, that's only actually, and when it's coupled with taste, that still those two motivators combined only make up 12%. Is that right?
Yeah, when we talk about consumers who are driven by those predominantly, that's only 12% of the population. That's a much smaller segment than I expected. But once you start looking at the data and start understanding the other values that are driving consumers, you start understanding that there's actually a complex system in play in a consumer shopping basket, and they're matching values to product to price in a much more complicated system than we distill it down to when we simplify to basic questions. So this is a little bit of a spoiler, but when we did identify in this research that there is a group of the U.S. population that is the equivalent of about 20% of the U.S. population who's highly motivated and driven to support regenerative agriculture. That's not the only segment, but why I focus on the 20% statistic of the U.S. population, which is what I'm calling the emerging regenerative market, is because those consumers' desire and demand and their value set is so high that 89% of them report that they would happily pay more for regenerative products. Because it's one set of a factor, price is one set of a factor in multiple data points. It loses the punch of the most important, because there's so many other values they want to fulfill.
Mm. Can you give me an example of some of the other values that come in, when we're talking about this 88%? What are some of the other values that are driving their purchasing decisions?
So there's 4 main buckets that I would put these values into. One of those buckets is health and nutrition. The second bucket is resilient food systems. The third bucket is community and ethical values. And then the fourth bucket is soil, it's water, and ecosystem stewardship. Right? So they're looking at how do they impact my health and my family? How do we make sure that there's a system that works within our food system long term? How do we support community and ethical principles? And then how do we steward the environment? And those 4 overarching values are values that consumers are trying to meet in a myriad of different ways.
And so the resilient food system, can we just drill down on that as it is distinct from the the regenerative or the soil health, water quality, and some of those things? Can we drill down on that a little bit and how they're different?
Absolutely. So in this survey, we asked consumers a whole host of different questions, from labels they're currently purchasing, priorities that they're purchasing on shelf right now, to things they care about in the environment and the around human health. And then we gave them a list of 18 different statements, values-based statements, kind of leading off of the questions that we had earlier in the survey. And 4 of those statements were directly driven back to resilience. And so one of those statements that consumers in the survey marked with an 8, 9, or a 10, when we're talking about that emerging regenerative market, there's 4 statements that they marked an 8, 9, or a 10 in terms of value of importance to their life. And one of the first statement in that resilience category is something that leads to more resilient food systems. So very directly, they stated that a priority for them is to support food that leads to a more resilient food system. The second statement that they made with an 8, 9, or 10 priority rank for them was to enhance farm resilience against pests, disease, and extreme weather. The third category was to be essential for the future of sustainable food production. And then the fourth statement that they supported with a value of 8, 9, or 10 was to mitigate the impacts of extreme weather events on food production. And so kind of all those 4 are the indicators that show the regenerative shopper's preference for supporting a resilient and regenerative food system.
Sure. And so these 4 buckets that you talked about earlier, would they all be part of this regenerative demand, or the demand for regenerative products?
Yeah, so the way we fielded the study, we're now getting into. So we started out by asking people some very generic questions about the importance of quality of food, about where they're shopping, about what they're purchasing, about which different claims they're looking for on shelf within the products that they're purchasing. And as we go deeper and deeper into the study, we start asking them more complex values as laddering off of that. And the values fit into all 4 of those buckets that I mentioned earlier. And in all 4 of those bucket categories, consumers voted at an 8, 9, or 10 in terms of level of importance, the values that sit with under that category. So for example, if we look at health and nutrition, consumers in large felt that this was the number 1 priority to them when they go to shelf to purchase products in this emerging regenerative shopper category. It was a very high importance across consumers as a whole. When we look at the general population of consumers, health and nutrition was a high priority for consumers. It became more intensified as you looked at values-based shoppers, which is kind of that subsect of 88% of the population. And then when you narrow down even further to look at the emerging regenerative market, this becomes one of the highest priority values that they're looking to meet in their own purchase decisions. And it comes down to increasing nutrient density, the actual vitamins and minerals in the food that they're purchasing. They want to see an increase in that. They want to see an increase in the nutritional quality of food as a whole. They want to see more essential nutrients in food through soil processes. So this starts telling us that consumers understand and can see the link between healthy soil leads to healthier plants, which can improve my health. And then the last bullet in that category was restoring human health is one of the goals that they want to see a healthy food system be able to accomplish, is more broadly restoring human health. But like I said, there are like 18 different questions or 18 different value statements in this question set. And we asked the consumers to rank them 8, 9, or 10. And consumers in the emerging regenerative market ranked all of these consistently as an 8, 9, or 10. So we have 18 different data points that they're saying are all between an 8 and a 10 in terms of importance. But the very next thing we did is we asked them, if you can only have 3, which 3 are most important to you? And so, we talked a little bit ago about mitigating climate change, and we talked about building resilient food systems. When push came to shove and they could only pick 3, the 3 that consumers picked were all 3 under this health and nutrition category. They wanted to increase the nutrient density of food, they wanted to increase nutritional quality of food, and they wanted to see more essential nutrients in food through natural soil processes.
Yeah. So that, to me, indicates a high level of education on their part, that they have gone out, that they've been educated somehow on how all these things play together, how they all fit together, and how the soil health can lead to better nutrient density, and that has positive impacts on their own health. Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, PowerFlex Supply. PowerFlex Supply is far from another big box store. They're staffed by experts who use everything they sell in their own pastures. Those same experts enable PowerFlex to offer the Rancher Success Program, a free service that will help you develop your grazing infrastructure plan. PowerFlex Supply is far from another big box store. They're staffed by PowerFlex Supply is far from another big box store. They're staffed by expert ranchers who use everything they sell in their own pastures. Those same experts enable PowerFlex Supply to offer the Rancher Success Program, a free service that will help you develop your grazing infrastructure plan down to the specific products you need for your livestock species, region, style of grazing, and budget. For 25 years, PowerFlex Supply has been guided by one rule. If their employees won't use a product on their own pastures, they won't sell it to you. That means the permanent and portable electric fencing, livestock water systems, and rotational grazing supplies they do stock have been hand-selected to be the best you can get. PowerFlex Supply is a leading North American distributor of Gallagher, O'Brien's, Speedrite, Strainrite, and many more. And if they couldn't find an existing product, PowerFlex Supply makes it themselves, including their legendary Super 9 Polybraid and rugged spinning Jenny. Visit powerflexsupply.com to get started. Do you have any sense of where they're going to get educated and where how this education is coming to them?
We asked them that, actually. And 10% of them say that they're learning about it through reading books and articles. 12% of them have learned about it directly from a farmer. 16% of them have learned about it from a podcast. 16% also said they learned about it on social media. And 20% of them are hearing it from their friends and family. And I think another interesting piece of data coming out of the survey that is very closely aligned to with where people are hearing about it, it's when they heard about it. And we learned through the study that the majority of consumers who are familiar with regenerative agriculture have learned about it within the past 2 years. In fact, 70% of consumers who are familiar with the term regenerative agriculture have heard about it in the past 2 years. And that growth in the past 12 months was a 47% increase in just 1 year alone. So we're kind of hitting this hockey puck upturn. It was, if we look back to 5 years ago, 6% of the people had heard about it at that point, then 13%, and then 22%, and then 47% in the last year alone. And what that shows us is a fast ramping up and acceleration of consumer awareness around the topic. But there's also there's a second side to this story, because consumers as a whole, when we look at the general consumer base, their awareness of the term regenerative agriculture is at about a 62%. So when we look at the general US population, 62% of consumers have heard of and feel that the term regenerative agriculture is familiar. They're aware of the term. But when we ask them how familiar were they with it and could they define it, only 26% of consumers in the general US population were familiar enough with the term to be able to explain regenerative agriculture. Now, when we get to that regenerative segment, that increases significantly. So we see that general population of who has a 26% awareness and understanding of regenerative agriculture jumped to 47% when we look at the emerging regenerative market. But what that tells us is that not everybody, Clay, in that emerging regenerative market truly understands that regenerative agriculture goes back to soil health. They don't understand that it's about management practices on the farm that increase ecosystem functions. There's a subsect of the emerging regenerative market who really gets it. And some of the definitions, because we gave them a fat fill in the blank, tell us what regenerative agriculture means. And some of the consumers who did the study gave us beautiful answers for what that means. And some people didn't. Some people were confused and they saw it like a lizard whose tail falls off and regrows. Or maybe lab-grown meat was another concept that came up as a definition that consumers put into that space, showing us that there's still a large gap in terms of people's awareness and their understanding. And that's a gap that we can fill through education. Now, what's also really interesting is because of the way the study was fielded, participants who participated in the study had no idea what they were answering questions about, except that this was about food and their purchase behaviors. We asked them all the questions about the awareness and the understanding and the definition of regenerative agriculture and what kind of things they were purchasing at shelf before we got to a point of giving them any inkling we were talking about regenerative agriculture. But at a certain point in the study, we gave them a definition. We said, well, we're talking about regenerative agriculture, and here's what that means. And in as much content as you could share in one social media post is how much we gave them. And then we asked them additional questions after that. And so these questions about values at shelf, and specifically breaking into the 4 categories of the nutrient in health, breaking into the idea of resilient food systems, soil and water and environmental stewardship, and community and ethical values. Those questions came up after they saw the definition of regenerative agriculture. And so I just want to be clear that they may have not known all of those things until we gave them a definition. But after we gave them a definition, it was very easy for consumers to extrapolate that the best thing about regenerative agriculture for me is it's building a healthier food system, and I get something out of it as a consumer, more nutrient-dense food. And so that connection between soil health and my own personal health was something that the consumers could extrapolate pretty quickly through that journey of the survey.
Sure. And I mean, you referenced that hockey stick growth. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point being like around 17% of, the population once there becomes that level of awareness or adoption, that it tends to take that kind of hockey stick graph type growth. And so do you think we're seeing that? We're seeing this real sustainable interest in regenerative products?
I think we definitely are. And the one thing that I really am curious about is that regenerative agriculture is complex, just like nature and nature's systems. I mean, it's beautifully simple in one respect, but it also has layers of complexity to it. And I think the success of regenerative agriculture is going to hinge to some degree on our ability to clearly communicate and not confuse consumers with an understanding of what it is.
Yeah, that's a great point. And how do we go about doing that? I mean, as we kind of, and I want to get back to the actual marketing portion of this and some of those things, but what are we doing, or how do we go about facilitating that education?
Well, I mean, I think to some degree, that is exactly why Regenified was founded, because we saw people in the marketplace raising their hand and saying, we're going to have 100% regenerative supply chain by 2030. And the reality is that didn't exist in the marketplace. There aren't enough farmers who have embraced regenerative practices who are creating true impact and changes in ecosystems for those kind of claims to be upheld. And so I think the number one thing is to make sure that there's integrity behind the claims and the commitments and the actions that are being recognized as regenerative. And that's why Regenified's verification is about field data capture and proving the impact of the practices that farms are making through their management practices, so we can differentiate greenwashing from legitimate action. And that's critical because we're facing some serious crises right now in agricultural systems, in food production. And if we continue practicing the way that we practice, we won't have a sustaining future. We're degrading soil faster than we can repair it. And so we need to change the practices right now. And if people are getting recognized for things that don't make a difference, I kind of want to restate how I say that. So when we think about if things continue to degrade and get worse and people can't see how it can get better, if they can't see data that shows improvement, there's a real risk that the interest and the momentum that the marketplace has for regenerative agriculture right now that's on that uptick will give up and think, oh, it didn't work.
Yeah.
If we're giving credit or if people are being recognized as regenerative for cover cropping. Now, cover cropping is amazing practice, and we want to see that. But in regenerative agriculture, it's part of a system. And true regenerative agriculture is about working in harmony with nature and functioning from a nature systems approach to leverage all of these practices in combination to achieve and restore the function of the ecosystem. So I think the really critical part here is to be able to validate and show that this, and not simplify this down to singular concepts, but to embrace the complexity of working with nature and communicate it in its totality without making it complicated and overwhelming. I know that seems like a very big challenge.
Well, yeah. And what have you found that is moving the needle in that regard? What are some of the things that you guys have found that are working?
Well, I think if we just take the study, for example, consumers can very easily understand that the plants are as healthy as the ecosystem that they're living in. So healthier soil with healthier ecosystems leads to healthier plants, leads to a healthier product, which is better for me. And so if we just kind of follow that through thread, and then they can see all the other values that might ladder into it. So if this is about building healthy, functioning ecosystems, what are all the things that can help back up rather than making very like sub points the hero? Let's make sure that we're talking about the core goal here is working in harmony with nature and restoring the function of ecosystems. Soil is a critical tipping point in this equation. So we really focus a lot on soil health. And in order to get to soil health, all of these things matter. And when we get healthy ecosystems functioning, here are all the benefits that can come from that. So it's just making sure that we're framing the conversation rather than getting, I'm trying to think of a good analogy, but I'm just not coming up with one off the top of my head. I'll use diet as a really good example. If I told you, Clay, that I was getting married in September and I want to look amazing in my wedding dress, so I'm giving up Oreos, you would immediately look at me and say, Kristine, you might have to do a little bit more than that. Right? But I think, people don't innately look at regenerative agriculture and understand the complexity of ecosystem function in the same way that we understand our own diets. So people can't look at regenerative agriculture and innately say, man, cover cropping is fantastic, but it might not get you to your ultimate goal. you're going to have to do more.
Well, like
So
Gabe is fond of saying, he's pretty confident that the majority of farmers in a room, if he asked them to describe how soils became aggregated, that he's pretty confident the majority of them couldn't do that. And so if farmers can't do that, it's a really big ask to say, okay, now consumer, suburban soccer mom, you need to understand this too and understand how it connects to healthier food.
yeah, it is a big ask. And I think, consumers don't need to know the science behind all of it, but they do need someone to, without complicating it, say, hey, look, we're really focused on producing the most nutrient dense food. The way we do that is really focusing on making sure that we're working in harmony with nature, that we're using nature's principles to get nutrient cycling in our soil, to have the water capture and cycling that we need and the energy cycling that we need and the diversity we need on our farm to lead to the healthiest products possible.
Yeah.
And so I think it is just really about it, it's also being willing. So that's the other thing we learned about this audience is the emerging regenerative market has a huge appetite for knowledge. They're unlike other consumer segments. Now, do they want to go to the grocery store and do they want to have to read a novel before they pick up an apple off the shelf? Absolutely not. They want a quick shortcut. They want that certification seal unpacked because they want something that tells me, oh, I can trust this. But they want to leave that store and they want to find out where that apple came from, how the farmer was growing it. They really, really care. This consumer segment is 2 times more likely than the general population to already know a lot about food and nutrition and health. They're also 2 times more likely to pay more for quality. They're 2 times more likely to go out of their way for food. They're 2 times more likely to care about where their food comes from. And they're 2 times more likely to support local. So they will go out of their way and they're willing to have conversations and willing to look deeper into the things that they care about. And they spend a significant amount of their time reading and learning and looking for information. That's another question we ask them is where do you want to learn about? Where would you expect to learn about regenerative agriculture? And some of the things they told us were that they wanted to learn about it from local community events. They also told us they want that certification unpacked so that they know they can trust it and it's worth investing that time and learning more about that farm or farmer or brand. They also were looking for more articles online, more blogs. They expect to hear about it on social media. They also want to know about it from grocery stores and market displays. And they want to meet more farmers at farmers markets who are growing these ways. And they want to dig in and have conversations about it.
And so how do we meet that demand at the grocery store level? It's Regenified. It's finding those brands that are going to go through the certification process and have the seal on the package. Is that the primary method that you think is going to be best to meeting this demand?
Yeah, I think labeling on store, once you take it into a retail environment, for example, you're walking into a store with thousands of SKUs often. And so labeling is part of how consumers identify things. And we're really talking about front of pack labeling because not too many consumers are picking up and reading the back of the pack when they're in a grocery store setting. It's front of pack labeling that gives people a really easy, quick access point. But it's also collaborating with others. So one of the things that we're doing is working to collaborate with retailers to help make regenerative products stand out so that when you think about it and you go into a grocery store and if there are 20 SKUs and they're spread out across the entire footprint of the grocery store, that's very hard for a consumer to find those and to search for those just because of sheer volume of content available to them. But once you condense those SKUs and you have an end cap, for example, now you have a discovery point. And that's what consumers are really kind of speaking to that they want is discovery points. That's why the certification is important to them is because it's a discovery point. The end cap, that in-store market display is a discovery point. They want trusted sources to help them discover something new, and then they're hungry enough to go home and dig in to learn more. And then they'll become discovery points for this for other people. So one thing that is really fascinating about this emerging regenerative market is they're a smaller group. Like I mentioned, this is 20% of the US population right now, but they have an outsized impact. They're the kind of folks who are educators in their community. They're sharing their knowledge with other people. They're early adopters, and so they're consuming, they're willing to work harder to consume the information, and then they're bringing other people along on this journey with them.
Yeah, when we have had regenerative products, labeled regenerative products in our house, honestly, at this point, it's been incidental. Like, I was making a purchase. I was there to make that purchase. I wanted that product. And then I got home and I noticed, oh, it says on the back, this is, we love regenerative agriculture in the case of one product, and so it wasn't something that I saw that attracted me to that. It was after the fact that I became aware of it. And so, but I think this is interesting to think about what you're talking about with those kind of sections, maybe even. So you could even, like, I could imagine that it would almost become like the gluten-free section.
Yeah.
Oh, here's the regenerative section in the grocery store. And do you see that coming, or is that happening already maybe?
Well, I know, so some retailers have started exploring that. There was an end cap display at New Seasons Market last year where they kind of broke rank and rule in how they use end caps, and they met that call for bringing together regenerative products in one shelf end cap, and it was everything from soap to crackers to bread, you name it. It kind of just ran the whole, it wasn't, normally you see end caps that are themed in a specific way. The only theme here was regenerative, and they didn't know if it would have the lift that they were expecting, but they saw a significant increase, double-digit percentage increase in sales of those products, because the unifying factor was what consumers are looking for, is they're looking to meet their values at shelf by purchasing products. They didn't need the retailer to make it easy for them to make a pasta meal at home. They really just wanted to make it easier to find products that align with their value set. So I think some of those early pilot studies that are being done right now by retailers are setting the stage for exactly what you're proposing, Clay.
But it's there's a lot of good indicators in the segment that would say that this is worth doing, right? They're willing to pay more. They're willing to go out of their way to get it. All these things that you kind of listed off earlier that they're willing to do, maybe that other shopper segments aren't willing to do. I think that is a pretty strong indicator, right?
Absolutely.
And so how do we then, we're talking primarily to farmers and ranchers today. How do we take this study and use it to our benefit? What are some of the things that you think, hey, this is a real opportunity here for farmers and ranchers?
Well, there's a real opportunity here, I think, to understand that consumers do care, that they value what you're doing, that you taking the step to be thoughtful about your management and sharing the story of what you're doing is your key to success with consumers. And that the consumers that we're talking about, when they understand the story of a farm, their willingness to pay that premium to support that purchase, even the face of adversity, is much higher. You get a section or a segment of loyalty from these high value shoppers that you don't find in the consumer marketplace. So, for example, let's say it was a year of severe drought and you were growing a product that was, your yield and your production was significantly dependent on drought conditions, or on good rainfall. Going to market and sharing those products with the consumer and letting them know this has been a challenging year and telling them what you're doing to mitigate that and why your management practices matter will just only make them that more excited to support you, even if there's a price increase on the product. Even if for this season, there's a 10% increase on your pricing to meet the market instability that you're facing, this emerging regenerative market is willing to do it. So I think the biggest thing you can do is just really be committed to learning how to tell your story and trying to break down the barriers between you and the end consumer who's buying your product, whether that is you selling directly to a consumer at a farmer's market or whether that's you selling to a brand where your products are going into an ingredient in a product. It's making that story available. It's sharing that story so it can translate through, because this emerging regenerative market is investing in change in the same way that each one of you guys in your farms are making an investment in a different future. Consumers have that same mindset. And the more they know about what that future can look like and the people who are investing it and why they're doing it, the more loyalty we'll see from the segment.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about the barriers that kind of came up as far as what was keeping these shoppers from being able to find the regenerative products.
I think the number one barrier that came up for consumers was they just couldn't find them anywhere. They're not seeing them when they go to the grocery store. They're not finding them when they're doing research. So the access point was the number one barrier people came up against, is inability. Because like I said earlier, 89% of these consumers are willing to go out of their way. They would change the store that they're shopping at or the place that they're purchasing. They would change a brand preference, but they're just not finding it to be able to make those changes in the first place.
Yeah. And what do you think is what's next? What are some of the things that are coming from the certification perspective, from maybe even brand relationships and some of those things that you're able to talk about? Just kind of set the stage for where this is headed, I guess.
We're definitely seeing an increase in interest across on players across the entire ecosystem. So more and more retailers are questioning, what is our role to play in regenerative agriculture? And we see more and more retailers who are investing in better understanding what regenerative agriculture is and defining the role that they have to play in that marketplace. We're also seeing more and more brands with an increased interest. I think there's a conference that I go to every year in Anaheim that is called it's called Expo West, and it is everybody getting together, about 70,000 of our BFFs in the natural and organic industry. And at that at that conference 3 years ago, people were throwing out the term regenerative as the next buzz phrase. But this past March, when I was at the conference, people are really having mindful conversations about what does it mean and how do we build a supply chain and what would it look like to be able to contribute or build a regenerative future in the food system. And so we're starting to see people move from the buzz phrase into concentrated efforts and actions around how do we take steps to move in this direction. And I think those are all good early markers and indicators, because it's not just about, going to the same source that you were buying your products from before. Think of as a consumer who it's easy to buy something on Amazon. These brands, these retailers need to think differently about where they're purchasing and how they're accessing products. And they're now in that mindset of how do we do it? And that's the first step.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think from from the producer's perspective? What are some of the things that they should look at doing? I mean, you talked about educating yourself on how to communicate, and I think that you said early on in this conversation that this emerging regenerative market expects to hear about it on social media, and so there's still an opportunity to start to tell your story on social media and figure out how to do that in a way that connects with the audience and finds the people that are looking for what you have to offer. But what are some of the other things, or are there some other things that producers should do to be ready when this market eventually does continue to develop?
Yeah, the very first thing I would say would be sit down and spend a little bit of time writing down your story. Spend time perfecting it and really think about all the things that led you to this point. Think about why you're doing it. Think about the things that you've seen happen on your farm as you've changed your management practices. Think about the things that got you really excited, or the things that, maybe were the critical turning points. Those are the stories that consumers resonate with. So just spend some time writing it all down and really get to a condensed elevator pitch that you can tell people about your what and your why. And then think about all the other things you noted as entry points into that conversation. And Clay, like you just mentioned, social media, consumers are out there and they're on social media. It's a place that they're sharing, they're connecting, they want to learn. Your story is powerful. And little tidbits of something you see on the farm this week, if it stops you and if it gives you a moment of wonder and aha, that's something you should be sharing. So share it at the farmer's market, share it on social media, share it with your buyers. The more you can tell your story and make connections. And the other thing I would say is, a lot of farms are selling into a commodity marketplace. And maybe you're selling to a grain elevator right now, and the grain elevator isn't really interested. Tell it to them anyways, but figure out who else you can start talking to who might be interested. Maybe the buyer you have right now is going to be a slow adopter, but maybe there are 3 other people in their place that actually want to have this conversation with you right now and be a partner in this movement. So keep having more conversations. Think about you telling your story as an opportunity to go out there and evangelize. Together, we'll create a different future, but it's going to take all of us being excited enough to go out and tell the story of regenerative agriculture and the stories of what we're seeing on our own farms to be able to create the sizable impact to transition and scale.
Yeah, very good. I appreciate that. And I think that, as far as the social media is concerned, a lot of the people that I've listened to over the years that have said, if you want to get traction in social media, go find the groups of people who are interested. I'm sure there are groups, Facebook groups, where you
Yes.
can go and find, hey, these are the people that are looking for local regenerative food. And you don't have to go in there and say, hey, I have beef for sale. You can go in there and say, hey, look at this picture of our spring calving, and here is a baby calf laying in some stockpiled forage protected from the elements, and just tell your story that way and let those connections kind of naturally form, and I've, kind of the, I think the rule of thumb that gets thrown around is, 5 posts of just adding value to 1 post selling. So maybe you make a post every day of the week or something, and then one Friday afternoon you say, hey, tomorrow we'll be at the farmer's market selling beef here, and I think that's one way to kind of start to get that traction.
That's a really good base rule of thumb, because if you think about any place that you go in your life, none of us want to be sold to. We all want to meet people, understand stories. We all want to learn things. And so when you start with that mindset of sharing, but you don't want to not ask. So I love your rule of 5 posts to 1. 5 posts sharing information about what you're doing, talking about why you're doing it, talking about what inspires you, to 1 ask, hey, we're going to be at the farmer's market this week and hope to see you there. That's a really good base. And then the second thing that you just said that I really want to double click on is find out where these people are in your community. If there's a local slow food group, for example, if there's a local buying club, you want to meet these people. You want to get to know these people who have these shared values and just share your story with them.
Yeah. And go out and say, hey, you have a group, you meet regularly, let me cater your meal. Let me bring the meal one time, and develop that relationship that way. And yeah.
I was just going to say, one other thought is, when we think about telling your story, there's there was kind of another segment or cut on this data based on what consumers are buying right now and what they care about that might be really valuable when you have to distill this down to simple talking points. When you're at a farm stand, for example, selling at a farmer's market, and you need to put a couple words on a sign, this is going to give you maybe some indicators of what consumers are looking for. So the emerging regenerative market is 4 times more likely to buy something with high quality ingredients. So talking about the clean, pure ingredients, this is just beef. There's nothing else in here. Ethical animal treatment. So the emerging regenerative market is 3.3 times more likely to buy products that support ethical animal treatment. They're 3.3 times more likely to buy products that have a high nutrient density. 3.1 times more likely to buy products from a traceable source. 2.8 times more likely to buy something with a clean label, meaning no additives or fillers. They're 2.8 times more likely to buy sustainably made, and 2.5 times more likely to buy organic. 2.4 times more likely to buy fair trade, and 2.2 times more likely to buy local. So those are some of the things that you can use if you're selling at a local farmer's market. You're local, but talking about where your farm is located in relation to this market, talking about, if you've done nutrient density testing, talking about the nutrient density test results you have. If you're, talking about beef, for example, show pictures of the beef, talk about your management practices. I love that example of the calf born. And those stories will really resonate with consumers and see that you're living the values that they care about.
Yeah, very good. I really appreciate that. So, Kristine, is there somewhere that people could go and get access to some of these data points and kind of look over the study for themselves and mine the value that's there?
Yeah, if you go to the Regenified website, which is just regenified.com, we have a resources page on there. On the resources page, you'll find the first release of the consumer research available on there for download. You can download it for free and dig into the details, and we'll continue to share more data coming out of the research that we're doing all through that resources page so that it can help people in the space find better success.
Also, the place that people can go to start the process of getting certified for themselves.
Absolutely. You can also follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram and Facebook, and we try to do our best to share information on all of those platforms as well.
Yep, and I am encouraged by the amount of regenerative coffee on the Regenified website. So,
if that's how you start your day, that's something very exciting, something that you should get very excited about.
Very good. Well, Kristine, anything else that we missed? Anything else that you want to make sure that we covered today?
Nothing that I can think of, no.
Well, in that case, I'll just say thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great to connect with you, Clay.
Very good stuff there with Kristine. Really appreciate her understanding of the market and just the lessons that we can learn about the importance of being able to market our products. And we've been talking a lot about that on the podcast lately. No matter what our product is, if we can't sell it to somebody, we're going to be limited in our ability to be successful. So really appreciate how that kind of fits in with what we've been talking about lately. Coming up next on the Working Cows podcast, looking forward to a conversation kind of picking up where we left off with Alan Williams, where we talked about grass-finished beef. We're going to talk to Alan Williams and Morgan Hartman about pasture to plate. How do we get it from the pasture? Okay, we've raised a good cut of grass-finished meat. How do we make sure that it's processed well, marketed well, and into the end consumer's hands and ultimately into their mouths in a way that is an enjoyable experience for them? So look forward to sharing that with you coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.